YouTube parts. Jack Spade here with High Noon Leatherworks, back for another leather adventure. So today we're going to start a new project, and we're actually going to make an ammo bag for shooting sports for a cowboy club that I belong to, and it'll hold ammo when we're at the range. So come on in and let's get started. I've already made a pattern, and it's actually going to be 3 pieces. It'll be each end, a right and a left, and then you'll have the bag itself that wraps around, and then these pieces will be the ends. So I made my pattern to the size that I wanted. It's 6 inches. The bag's going to be 6 inches tall, and at the base of the bag it's going to be 2 3/4 inches, and then it goes down to 2 1/4 inches at the top up here. And then you can tell I've got these large holes in my pattern, and what those holes are is I'm actually going to use leather lace. So instead of doing stitching like I've done on all my projects before this, I'm actually going to use leather lace, and we're going to lace this bag. So that'll be something new also. And it's going to be a 2-tone project. So this part of the bag, the large part, the main part of the bag, is going to be dark brown in color, and then the right and the left end, or the sides, those are going to be saddle tan. So we're going to get a 2-tone effect, and then actually a 3-tone, tritone effect, because the lace will more than likely be a different color than those 2 pieces or those 3 pieces. So I've made my pattern. I've roughly cut a piece of leather that I can get all 3 of these pieces out of, and I'm ready to trace it and cut it out. So that's where we're at this point. So I'll go ahead and get started with tracing the large piece first. And again, if you've seen past videos, I use a ballpoint pen to trace, and when I do my beveling, any of that ink mark comes off. And the key when you're doing this on any pattern is to make sure your pattern doesn't move as you do your tracing. That could cause some issues with finish. So, and especially with doing lacing like this, the hole alignment, because those holes have to line up perfectly for those pieces to fit together. And a little bit of background on the pattern. When I made the pattern and the holes, I measured all of the holes to be a 1/2 inch apart from each other. So the holes on this are exactly matching at the bottom, and then they're a 1/2 inch apart as you go up. So they have the exact same number of holes. So as I lace this together, those holes are going to pull that bag tight, because it's going to be holding ammo. Let me show you what it's going to be holding. In the competition shooting that I do, I shoot .45 Colt, and so it'll hold, normally up to 20 of these each stage. So it doesn't have to be a huge bag, but the bag can also hold my earplugs. You know, it'll be big enough to hold ammo and things like earplugs or safety glasses, that kind of thing. So you can make it as small or as big as you'd like. So those holes need to line up. So I'll lay my pattern back down, make sure that it's within the tracing area again. I'll hold it down, and I do have an opening here at the top, right down here, cut out, and that's going to be a cutout to where that's going to be our closure. And what's going to be neat about this bag, other than the fact that it's going to be laced together and it's going to be basically tritone in color, is that the closure is going to be deer antler. So that's going to be pretty neat too. So it will be period correct. It'll be in the 1800s. It'll fit right in that time period. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and mark all these holes that get punched out for the lace. It is very important that those holes match up to that pattern, because the two pieces that I cut out for the pattern, those holes are precise and in the exact spot they need to be in. So I've got one end, I'll use it as a right and a left when I cut those out. So there was no reason to make two of those, because unless you go twice the amount of work and you got a chance of them not being exactly the same. This way you just flip it over when you're doing your pattern on your leather, and you got a right and a left, and you're using the exact same pattern, so you know they're going to match. So I'll just go down, mark each one of these holes, and I'm just marking it roughly because the punch is going to make sure that it punches out the holes perfect. So there's some pattern traced out on the leather, and I'll take the side and I'll flip it over on the shiny side, and we'll make that the right. It doesn't really matter, they're both going to be the same. So the right or left side. Really, I don't even need to flip it over for the other side, because it's going to match whether I flip it over or not. So trace around, keep it steady, don't let it move as you mark all of your holes for your lace. Continue around. Alright, there's one end, and then I'll move up a little bit, and we'll trace the other end. thing about tracing a pattern on the leather, especially using a pen, is you want to take your time, nice and slow. Make sure you don't make any mistakes. Alright, there's the second side. So here's my two sides of the bag, and here's the front and the back, and then here's the flap that will come over. This will be open, and then we'll have a loop that'll go on the front of the bag. So this will go, the loop will go through here, and then there will be an antler, a deer antler, that'll be our closure. So we're ready to cut these out. So that'll be our next step. I've got my self-healing cutting mat here, and you can use a straight edge if you'd like. A lot of times, if I have a good sharp knife and I'm cutting fairly straight cuts, I'll use a straight edge, and sometimes I don't. So today I'm just gonna do slow, steady cuts, make sure that I get through all the leather, and then I'll just cut that piece off, set it aside. That's a big enough piece I can make a few keychains or something out of that, so I'll definitely hang on to that. Come down to this corner, and I kind of rounded those corners a little bit because I didn't want a square corner sticking up at the end where it gets sewn. So then I'll follow that line with my razor knife. And again, as long as you go slow and steady, it's very easy to follow that line. And once you get your first cut in there, and when I get to my rounded edge on the closure part, I'm just going to go straight, and then I'll do that rounded edge separately. So once you put that first score mark on there, the second cut goes pretty quickly, and your blade, if it's good and sharp, will follow that score that you put in there. So you can go a lot quicker the second time around. There's that piece. Now that piece there probably isn't good for anything, so that I'll probably throw that away. I believe I'll cut this other straight side first before I do the rounded closure side. And it's obviously a key to have good lighting. I have LED, 4-foot LEDs over the top of my work surface, and they're 5,000 Kelvin LED bulbs, which is supposed to be the closest thing to real natural sunlight. So you have a nice bright work area. So let's move those pieces out of the way for now until we finish this one up. So I'll go to the rounded part, and again, you want to take your time, make that first score right on that line. So I'm not trying to cut all the way through the leather at this point. I'm just getting through that top layer. Because if I make a small mistake or get off my line just a little bit, and I'm just scoring that top layer, I might be able to save that piece. But if I'm trying to cut through the entire thickness of the leather the first cut, and I make a mistake, it's going to be really tough to try to salvage any part of that. Because as I make my second cut here, my blade, as long as it's fairly sharp, it's going to want to follow that first cut that I put in there, where I went through the top layer. So then it becomes very easy to cut through. I don't have to push real hard. I don't have to focus as much on staying on that line on my pattern. My blade's going to do that for me. I mean, obviously I have to pay attention to what I'm doing, but that blade, if it's sharp, it will follow that first cut that you put in there. So we'll set that aside. I'll clean this edge up over here on my mark, and then that's that piece. And let's cut out the opening for the latch. Now that, you want to be real careful. You don't want to go past your cut line. So what I do is I'll go a little over halfway, turn it, and then I'll go to the next corner across from it, so that I don't go past that corner. I don't want to get out into this area out in here anywhere. So I can go two different directions there. Keep turning it. So I'm cutting down about 3/4 of the way, and I turn it, go to the opposite corner, and then cut the other quarter of the way. So I've got one more side left here. So I'm cutting down that line about 3/4 of the way to the other corner. Turn it around and go the other quarter from the opposite end. And what that'll do is see how that popped out of there? That'll make those corners good and crisp and clean, and then you don't have to worry about going past that area. Anything you need to clean up, you can come back in there, clean that up, and you can see the opening now. That will end up being our closure. So now we're ready to punch all the holes in these. But I think what I'll do is I'll punch all the holes at the same time, because I have holes to punch in the sides also, the side pieces. So let's set this aside, and let's go ahead and cut these two pieces out, the two end pieces, and then we'll punch all the holes at the same time. I'll probably fast forward you on punching those holes, but you can still see them being punched. I'll just run it a little faster. So cut that piece off. Obviously that's big enough to save. Come down to the top. Again, I'm really focusing when I'm doing this to stay on that pattern line. I'm going to stop on that one. I'm not going to continue on, because I'm going to come down this side, and what that'll do is that'll save more of this scrap for another project. I always try to look ahead, and as I'm making my pieces of leather for my projects, when I lay them out with my patterns, I always try to look at it and see the best way to lay them out on the leather so that I can save as much scrap as possible. Because obviously, if you've looked into it, leather's very expensive. So I try to save as much as possible each time, and then I just get that many more projects out of it. And I do have these corners rounded on these ends, but I'm going to come back after I cut all the straight cuts and round those corners off. I'll do that last before I do my hole punching. It just seems to be a lot easier to do it that way instead of trying to cut around them as you're doing your straight cuts. Again, take my time on my first cut so I stay directly on the line. Then my second cut, you notice, always goes a little quicker. Throw away my scrap. Now I can come back on the corners. You could either cut around it, or normally you could take, like on these, they're not real sharp corners. You take 3 cuts as you go around and rotate it. And if they're not real sharp corners, normally 3 cuts you can, and it's a lot easier to cut it that way than to try to actually rotate your knife to get a round edge. And like I said, these aren't perfectly round but by any means, but I did it on the pattern so that it wouldn't have a sharp corner on these pieces when we inserted them into the bag itself and started lacing it up. So I'm rounding those corners off. And I'm moving those little chips out of the way as I do it. You can see I'm getting about 3 cuts on each one to get that rounded corner. So there's my 2 ends. So I'm ready to hole punch. So let me clean off my mat, throw away my scraps, and I'll be right back with the hole punching. Alright, as I said, on these holes, as we punch these, I'll probably fast forward so that you don't have to watch me punch every single one of these. So I'm using 4.0 punch, and this I believe came in a kit, a starter kit that I got from Tandy, and I've got my marks on there so I'll know exactly where to punch each hole. So I'll put it right on the mark, and I do have a scrap piece of leather under that because I don't want to go through and put holes in my cutting mat. So, and there you go, there's the hole that it punched through. So I'll go ahead, punch all these holes, and then I'll be back. Alright, so there's all the holes punched, ready for the lace. First thing we'll have to do is bevel all the edges, and then we'll have to do the dyeing before we do the lacing. So there's our pieces cut out, and have our holes stamped in for our lacing, have our cutout here for our antler clasp. So next time when you come back, we'll be doing some beveling and dyeing so that we can go ahead and move forward with this project. So thanks for coming, thanks for sharing. I would appreciate it very much if you please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.